Your hosts are The Great Order and No White Guilt. And this is the after party. The crown winner for last week is Bio's Spirit of the West, financially gifting $100. God bless you, brother. Congratulations. Thank you so very much. In second place was Rory, financially and Rimrep, actually both financially gifted $3 a piece. Thank you both, and congratulations to you both as well. Folks, you can financially gift on Entropy, where you can also watch the stream and ask and vote on questions. The Entropy will be up and running in just a moment. The link for Entropy and Cash App, where you can also financially gift, are down in the description below. Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests on the after party. Today we have the one and only, ladies and gentlemen, the hero from down under. Lovely Porridge is on tap with us today. Porridge, please introduce yourself to anybody who may not know who you are. We have a lot of new people coming on board into the practice of going free. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into the conversation.
Well, good day, guys. It's good to have the gang back again together, and hello to all you guys in the chat. Yeah, I'm Jubilation Media, and you'll find me on my YouTube channel. And don't worry about Twitter and all that. If you do want to contact me, I'm on Twitter, but I could be banned soon, so don't worry about that. But yeah, that's all. That's about it.
Well, welcome back, my friend. We've been seeing a lot of crazy news from down under. So first, just tell us what you've been seeing down there. What's it like on the ground?
Oh, well, I think a lot of people know what's going on in Melbourne. I'm a bit of a celebrity, actually. Got people saying to me, "Oh, you're from Melbourne. What's it like?" And I say, "Well, I can't take a crap without logging on with some QR code or something." And the reaction is from one side, they'll say, "Oh, well, stay strong, brother. We support you. You want to get out of this." And the other side is saying, "Oh my God, you guys are so progressive. I wish I lived in Melbourne. I wish we had the same lockdowns." So yeah, it's really.
You literally have people say that to you?
Oh yeah. Haven't you heard the people kind of praising Melbourne for our strict lockdowns and how we first got our numbers down and then it came back? I think New Zealand is trying to outdo us at the moment with how strict they are, because they want the praise, and so their prime minister is now a bit of celebrity too across the world, being praised for her restrictions.
Yes.
But yeah, it's between New Zealand and Melbourne. We've both been put on the map. But yeah, don't worry about me getting. Don't worry about me getting into any trouble for saying anything. A lot of people are a bit worried about what they can say in Melbourne, but our government gave us these cool devices for free, and it keeps us safe. It's just like this little dog collar, and I'm wearing it right now. And so if I say something like, "Don't trust the authorities," I get a little bit of a zap.
Porridge is a bit of a comedian, everybody, if you're not familiar with him.
Oh yeah, I specialize in cringe, but no, I might take this collar off.
No guests were harmed in the making of this tap episode. Don't worry. It's all a bit of a show.
We have some people not wearing their collars. We call them anti-buzzers, but I might take mine off for this stream so I can speak a little more freely.
Well, don't do anything that's going to get you hurt. But what kind of things are you experiencing with your mobility, your access to things that you used to do a couple of years ago? What things were like in 2019? Like, give us the 2019 to 2021 side-by-side comparison of what your day-to-day life is like.
Well, we're not allowed to talk about 2019 anymore. Those were the old days, and we got the new normal now. That's what they're saying, that what we have is normal. And I find it a little bit hard to compare to other countries, because I think the restrictions that we had eventually became spread across the world. And so I don't know if it is as strict as people say it is, or I've been just conditioned to feel it is a little bit more normal. But I can tell you what it's like at the moment. I'm allowed to go 10 kilometers, I think, from the radius where I am, only for specific reasons. One of those reasons is for essential shopping, not browsing or anything like that. It has to be groceries. And only one person from every household is allowed to do that. You're not allowed to go with your wife, for instance, to the shops, to the supermarket. We're allowed to have 2 hours of exercise. It was extended. It was 1 hour, and now it's 2. So we can walk outside, but it must be in a mask. It must be socially distanced. You're not allowed to meet up with other people. And I think you are allowed to take your wife on a little walk. So that's a bit of freedom we have. Other than that, working mostly from home, unless you have a special permit from the government. I do have a permit, but the economy has been hurt so much that I get very, very little work, probably a fifth of what I was previously doing. And there is a 9 p.m. curfew. You're not allowed outside after 9 p.m. unless, again, you're working with a permit. And all small businesses are closed. The only things that remain open are petrol stations, supermarkets, warehouses, and office supplies are open only for click and collect, which means you order online, you go with your car, and they bring it out to you. But that's all I can think of at the moment. Yeah, you're not allowed to meet people. You're not allowed to go to other people's houses. You're not allowed to see your family. So it'd probably be, yeah, I can't tell you what we can't do. It's a lot quicker to tell you what we can do. But that's a quick rundown.
Jared, you're muted.
I've been doing this for 3.5 years, folks. When you say exercise 2 hours a day, that means you're allowed out for 2 hours if you're going to a gym. How does that work exactly? What do you?
Oh, no gyms.
No gyms.
No, not even the gym equipment they put in public parks, as far as I know. That might have changed recently. Now, you see what I'm telling you, we have been given more freedoms because we've been quite good lately. It was only about a week ago, 5 kilometers radius and 1 hour exercise. And they said, well, we're going to be super nice to you and double it. It's like that scene from George Orwell's 1984 where they reduce the rations and then the next day they increase it just by a little bit and make out the big brother has been good to you. But I do understand the reasons for being careful, and of course washing your hands and not trying to spread COVID and wearing a mask in stores. But things like 9 p.m. curfew, if I would like to walk my dog after 9 p.m, and I do, where there's hardly anybody around, surely that could not be a risk of spreading COVID. And so this is where I get critical of these restrictions, when there seems to be no reason for it. And when they're closing small businesses, but they're allowing these big businesses to remain open, where lots of people end up congregating, it seems to create a greater risk. And so a lot of these things don't add up. And I understand you can't have a million rules. They kind of have to have blanket rules. And the 9 p.m. rules, because people were sneaking out at night and, meeting their families, God forbid. And that's why the restriction came in. But there's a lot of cases where there is no way you can justify what they're doing. And it happened very early on in the pandemic where the Premier was asked what information he was given by the health authorities about golf courses being a risk. And he said, we weren't told they were a risk. We were told they were non-essential. And that's why we closed them down. And that's something very hard for me to digest, is it's not a risk, but it's not essential. And what the hell is the point? It's very hard for me to find any sense of that at all.
This is it's not an exaggeration at all to say this is a prison. They're giving you yard time. I mean, there's lingo in prisons that is going to have to be employed in regular living if this is allowed to continue. I mean, it's such an absolute outrage. You can go so many kilometers from your house. You're only allowed to have so many hours of yard time a day. There are maximum security prisons in the United States where prisoners who are mass murderers get more yard and exercise time than the population of Australia. That is demonic. And I saw a video the other day. I don't know, are they states, Porridge, in Australia, or provinces? Where you live, are they called states or provinces? The
Yes.
smaller.
Am I coming through all right?
Now you are. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, they are states.
Okay,
yes.
so I don't know if it was from a state or it was the national government, federal government, but it was some woman in charge of the healthcare, as I say, for the state or the national government, and she was saying there will be multiple shots a year, and these will be boosters, and then and of course, if you just logically approach this, then and you think, well, you have a virus that mutates rapidly. And it's obviously going to be able to mutate outside of the vaccination envelope. And that's what they're saying at CNN, which is all that matters. And so they would need a new vaccination for that. And then they would need more boosters for that. We're not going to be talking about anything, of course, as I say on this channel. We agree with the CDC and the WHO. And even when they disagree, we still agree. So that is the opinion of this channel. We just do whatever they say. But there are a lot of things, a lot of talk out there, and this, of course, is going to have an effect on the population that we can give our opinion is going to be far worse than the outcome of any disease that we've seen before. The entire population of a country will start to go insane. Everybody put out of all of the small business, or many of the small businesses put out of work, big businesses allowed to operate, people having to not able to socialize, which is normal for the human animal. This is going to have, and so I guess I want to ask, how are you? Now, I really enjoyed your jokes there, anti-buzzers and everything at first. I was laughing. But how are you holding up to all of these restrictions? And you can't actually, all the gyms, I guess, are closed, or it sounds like maybe they're all closed. How are you holding up physically, mentally? And then how do you see the population holding up mentally, physically? And what are your short and long-term expectations if this continues? I mean, what happens to a population, especially children, in an environment like that, born into a prison? How will they grow properly? How will their brains make the normal connections that they're meant to make? I don't know. The floor is yours, brother.
Yeah, well, I can't complain when there's a lot of people who have it worse off than me. And a lot of people have mental illness. They already had issues before this whole thing happened. And I think it's exasperating all those issues. But I'd be lying to say that it hasn't affected me negatively and it hasn't taken its toll on me. Not to whinge about it, but the last lockdowns of last year were weighing heavy on my head at one point, where I thought I couldn't take too much more of it. And it wasn't that anything terrible was happening, but the stress of hearing about COVID constantly over and over, and not being able to have real contact with anyone, doing Zoom calls to your family and that, is just so unnatural. And at first I would say that I was doing well. I learned how to do hydroponics. I learned how to brew beer. I did a lot of gardening. I fixed up the house a bit. I got into working out a lot more until I injured myself. But eventually, when you don't have contact with people and you do those things, you're not finding as much enjoyment. And you end up saying, well, why should I get up early this morning? Why should I go and do some gardening? Because you don't feel like you can share your experiences with anyone. It becomes pointless. But enough about me. The kids are really suffering, I think. And they probably don't even know it themselves. But can you imagine in your say you're 12 years old, you're in year 6, and you've just missed out all the experiences for that year with your classmates, going out with the friends, doing crazy stuff. and that was your last year of school, and you'll never have that experience again. And then the next year, you were going to go into high school, a whole new things, you become feminine, getting interested in girlfriends and boyfriends, and you've lost that entire year as well. These kids will never look back on year 6 and 7 as being wonderful times of their life or interesting times of their life. They will remember playing Xbox all day and mum going crazy because everyone's stressed. And that's not to discount babies who their first year of kindergarten is missed out. I can't even comprehend all the different ways people have been affected by this. It's quite sad. And I don't think the government has really considered these things either. I don't think they've taken them seriously, how they talk about our safety, but I don't think they fully appreciate how many people are suffering. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Are there no, go ahead, Jared.
I was just going to say, if it comes up again during our conversation, I appreciate the modesty, but the personal is what connects people when they're hearing something like this. So please don't hesitate to talk a little more, if it's appropriate, about what it's been like to have to talk to your family, extended family, over Zoom calls and things like that. What that feels like, what that's doing to you. That's serious stuff. But anyway, Jason, you were saying something as well.
You're absolutely right. And I also want to mention that Rory in the live chat he pointed out that lockdown is already a prison term. That's already a term where you're then not allowed to go to the mess hall. You're then not allowed to go out into the yard and work out and that's this sort of thing. So yeah, we're already introducing these prison terms to the population. Well, I think about this we have homeschooling parents. We have people who send children to public school, people who send children to religious, very expensive, and private schools, various types. These children, and Porridge is pointing out here, it's really important. Our children, our white babies, the future of tomorrow, they're trapped. They're trapped. They're not having the interaction with their peers and other adults. They're not able to grow and mature. And these years, they are critical. They are critical. When you're a child, you are a sponge, or the closest you're going to come to being a sponge when it comes to the information in the world around you. And you're going to be negatively influenced, affected by these measures, unquestionably. And then you're also going to be negatively affected as a child by the pressure that's on the parents as they're coming unraveled. It's not like, this is happening in a vacuum somewhere. And well, now all of these youngsters and young adults, we could think about so many different groups of people who are young adults and they're finally out on their own, trying to make it on their own. How are they going to be able to deal with this? Senior citizens who are perhaps struggling with loneliness, struggling with disease, just normal things brought on by age, and they need that sort of company. They need that news from the outside. You can't just have the television on, and that's going to be. I mean, for God's sakes, they get television in prison. So yeah, this is absolutely despicable. But as I said, it's not taking place in a vacuum. So it's not like, well, you're not allowed to go out into the community, but mom and dad are just going to blossom with all of these cool things, cool educational things to do and grow and stimulate young minds. No, mom and dad are going to be wrecks because first of all, we are born into a world where we don't know how to get along anymore. The anti-whites have created a society where it's all produce and consume. We go our different ways, and then we feed our egos, and we feed selfishness, and that's what it's all about. And now people are being rammed together, and we saw in the United States early on where these police called rather for domestic disputes have skyrocketed, at least not according to me, according to some mainstream news agencies. But these sort of things, of course, and it's expected to be the case. And our children are in these environments. So from the very old to the very young, and all of this is being lost. And I think people are tolerating things like missing out on a proper funeral, missing out on a saying goodbye to somebody. That is such an emotionally important thing for the vast majority of all of humanity. But it's so incredibly important. And if you don't have that opportunity to be able to come together and celebrate someone's life, and say goodbye to them, or mourn something tragic that happened to them and say goodbye to them, many people find that this is a psychological wound that lasts the rest of their lives. What about the weddings? What about the births? What about all of these sorts of things? I think people are tolerating them now. And Porridge, I'd like to have you speak to this. Tolerating the fact that they're going without these things now because there's some sort of anticipation that it's the government tomorrow is going to say, well, okay, everything's better, and we can go back to funerals and weddings and christenings and family coming to the hospital for the births. But the government is actually saying, at least what I saw, the clips that I've seen of the Australian government and some of the state governments there, they seem to be saying, no, it's never going back to the births where everybody shows up, and the christenings and the weddings and the funerals and being able to say goodbye. And what about the courting? How in the world are people going to be able to court and really get to know each other on any substantive basis when you're not allowed to go see anybody else? You can only travel 10 kilometers from your house, folks. How are they going to do? And you're only allowed out so much time, and you can't. This is really nuts. Do you believe, Porridge, that there's this anticipation in some of the population that, they're probably going to end it next year. They're probably going to end it 6 months. And so there's this patience, or do you see more people who are just surrendering and just accepting that they've got a 6x10 cell or something now? That's going to be the rest of their lives.
Yes, I think there's a bit of both of those situations where they think that if we do what we're told, and the government keeps putting out these promises of new freedoms that will be granted to them, it can't be much longer. They say maybe, next year, that should be it. And I can understand them having hope in that, because otherwise it's quite dreary to think it's never going to end. It's really hard to think that this time next year, I'll be talking to you still in lockdown. That's just, I don't want to believe that. So I can understand people opting out. And the thing is that we did do everything we were told, and we got cases down to 0, which was incredible. No other country did that. Right down to 0, our freedoms came back. And then suddenly the government starts importing people, and they say, well, there's a new strand now, and we're going back in. That really hit everybody like a ton of bricks. It was hard to comprehend. Now, when you anticipate what the future will be like, you're going to be called a conspiracy theorist, because if you assume something bad in particular, like this is not going to end, even after they've said these measures will always keep going on. But I'd like to talk to people who have the attitude that, well, yes, this is tough. Children are suffering. People can't say goodbye to their loved ones. But what do you want to do? Do you want to open everything and let everyone just die of COVID? No, of course I don't want to do that. I do believe in reasonable precautions. But all this makes me, it is hard to think about the bigger picture, because we're living in the situation right now. And all this has made me think about September 11, because we just had the 20th anniversary this month. And after those planes hit, there was absolute chaos in New York, and the city was in lockdown. The police and military on high alert, treating everyone as suspicious. And that's totally understandable, because a terrible thing happened and nobody knew what the hell was going on. So I think most people were willing to cooperate with the restrictions, and they couldn't move freely, and there was extra security. But the government used that disaster to start a war in Iraq. Then they created the NSA with the powers to spy on every citizen, cameras everywhere, and that was referred to as the surveillance state. And as time went on, people started to realize that this wasn't about security. This wasn't about keeping Americans safe, because they were importing millions of people from the Middle East, the countries they were fighting. And these TSA guys, they were instructed not to stop and search people who fit the profile of a terrorist. So I saw this video, the TSA guys were getting this little white kid to strip down to his undies so they could check if he had bombs strapped to him. And because they know that a white kid is probably the least of anyone to blow up a plane. And that's exactly why they were harassing him, because he was the least likely suspect. So, the authorities had extended all these powers. And later on, we learned the whole war was a hoax. And 20 years on, how many of those powers have been wound back? Not a single one. So the reason I wanted to talk about 9/11 is because I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And there were some insane conspiracy theories about September 11, about how there were no planes. And there's some insane theories about COVID. COVID can be really nasty, especially if you're in bad health. And I think it was reasonable to bring in restrictions to prevent the spread, especially when we knew nothing about it. We didn't know what the hell was going on. But you'd have to be naive to think that the authorities wouldn't exploit this and wouldn't try to increase their powers to a point where it wouldn't be about the virus anymore. Because that's what happened after 9/11, and what has changed since then. But this time around, I'm trying to work out what point I'm trying to make. Now, I don't think it's about the surveillance state. That's already in place, right? And that can be extended upon. I think they're more concerned now with social control. We're no longer allowed to meet our family and friends. So the only way we can communicate now is through the system, through Facebook and Instagram, where our entire conversation is at the mercy of these platforms, which are heavily tied up with government. And I get some strange reactions from people when I talk about the risk of this situation and giving the government more power, because they seem to think that it's okay for the government and these corporations to have total control over us because they're not tyrannical. In other words, it's like saying it's okay to have tyrannical measures because they're not tyrants. But I think you guys understand this because you've experienced censorship. I think it's clear to all of us that our governments don't care about us. They want to erase us. And so that's why we have these feelings about these issues that other people might not. The vagues might not have.
That's the fundamental line. That's a big conversation here in the States right now as well, that if you're going to put a line and have people on one side or the other, it's more so than traditional left-right paradigms and things like that, although there is some substantial not overlap, that's not the right word, but you can kind of copy and paste the left on one side, the right on the other. There's a word I'm looking for that's escaping me, but it's not even so clean. The cleanest, simplest way to explain it is it's people who trust the mainstream narrative that the media and government gives us, and there are people that don't. And we're seeing a fundamental divide in that type. Somewhat on that note, I'll reiterate what Porridge is expressing is in his state in Australia. It's not, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not uniform across the entire country. Taking that into consideration, and also the fact that there are some countries going in the opposite direction, and then there's a spectrum in the middle. When we were on air a couple of weeks ago, Jason and I briefly discussed how Denmark, we were asking someone about this, was going in pretty much the opposite direction as Australia, aside from certain things about the border, because they have to contend with other EU states. Internal to Denmark, it basically is going back to how things were in 2019. So how do you square that with what we've been discussing, what you were just talking about? And how do you, I know it's all speculation to some degree, but we're always curious to get how your mind works on such things. What percentage of this is just social experimentation, social control, seeing how different programs play out in different places, how different populations react in different circumstances, versus a more silver lining kind of view, which I try to remind people of, and I do believe this is true to a large extent, is that as dire as things look, if there was one monolithic power structure behind this entire thing, I think the world would be even more drastically draconian than it is right now. I think it's more likely, from what we can deduce, it's more likely that there are several, as these things usually go, different competing power blocks behind the scenes who are, in varying ways allied with each other, but then stabbing each other in the back. It's messy. The average person out there that you were describing, they just trust what they see on TV and media. I do caution people who are like us and who are awake and who ask questions and think critically, not to be tempted to go down the internet rabbit hole to the other extreme and think that there's just this dystopia that's inevitable and it's on lock. Nothing's inevitable, first of all. But yeah, even though some of these people in the higher ranks are intelligent, sophisticated people, and they have a lot of resources at their disposal, it's probably also an absolute mess and dumpster fire in certain ways behind the scenes as well. And even though things look dire, something of this nature on this global scale has never been tried before. And so that might very well be their undoing as well. A lot could go wrong if you're trying to do something across the entire planet or most of the planet. But how do you square those two things? Is it social control? Is that why we're just social experimentation? Is that why we're seeing a variety of approaches in different countries? Or does it more speak to the fact that there's not a unified power structure behind this? It's a little messier than maybe some of us think. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there's some centralized control ringing up our Victorian Premier and saying, how some of these people have the idea that George Soros is on the phone commanding people, this is what the next restriction will be, or this idea that Melbourne is a testing ground for the rest of the world. Yes, people do get together and there is advice from overseas, and yes, we could be looked at as a testing ground in that they are noticing how things work and how people react. But let's not speculate, because we can look at things that we actually have proof for, rather than speculate, and that way we will be we won't make mistakes that make us look stupid and discredit us. If we make these predictions about how it all works and that, when we don't have proof, then people can just dismiss it. But when you're talking about power and how the system works, and and what we see in the Western world, we're all in the same boat, really. And especially in regards to anti-whitism, there's no country that's being left out on that. And so you can say that, yes, there are powers that are working together to do this. But something I noticed people have pointed out, that there's this claim that our entire system is white supremacist, and the governments and media and corporations, they're all racists, conspiring to harm non-white people. This is what they tell us. This is what they tell our children. And these same people think it's a good idea to hand over total control to these governments and to these corporations and to the media, and just let them dictate every movement, everything you think and say. They should have total control over it. These people they call white supremacists. And no, I'm not going to say they're hypocrites. This is what the conservatives would say, isn't it? They'd say, oh, it's hypocritical, isn't it? No, it shows they don't actually believe that so-called racism is a problem at all. They don't think the system is white supremacist even in the slightest sense. They don't believe that white people discriminate against non-whites to any significant standard. They only say these things as an excuse to do harm to us. And the reason they support the state, the media, and they support corporations, because they know these institutions are anti-white. They know the entire system is anti-white, and that's why they want it to have total control over you. So that's something I can point to and say that's exactly what is happening. Whereas with the COVID stuff, with the things about great resets, about Klaus Schwab or whatever his name is, all that stuff, I leave that alone because I don't know for a fact.
What about the fact that we've seen reports here of Australian police opening fire rubber bullets, but still it's a pretty intense situation when we see this kind of aggression on the general public from the police forces. Was that in Sydney? I know we have someone in Sydney, from Sydney, excuse me, in the chat right now who's chiming in as well and is lamenting the same draconian measures that you are suffering yourself right now, Porridge.
Yeah, I think it's Sydney and Melbourne are the main ones who have really copped it. I don't think Western Australia, South Australia or Queensland have it quite as hard, but the borders are locked down as well, and people who might not be locked down are still restricted from coming and visiting their families in a different state and so on. But yeah, you wanted to talk about the tradies, did you? What the situation is with them, the protests?
Yeah. I mean, I think most of us have seen there's been protests against the lockdowns and the mandates, and it's gotten pretty violent.
Yeah. Well, you know, tradies, they're a demographic that anti-whites, they really don't like them because they work with their hands. They're practical, and they often think practically.
So tradies is Australian for the working class laborers, manual labor.
Yeah, they're a lot. You know, there'd be a point where you'd call them the white working class, and what do white anti-whites think of them? I don't need to even say, do I?
Mm-hmm.
But I find it interesting. I think construction workers might have been the first group to be told they have to get vaccinated or lose their jobs. I think nurses have been mandated since, but I think it's interesting that tradies were targeted like this. You know, why them?
If anything, construction workers tend more to work outside, so you wouldn't think they'd be a priority as much as people cooped up in stores and offices.
But like I said, anti-whites seem to have a problem with the working class, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And you see a lot of these tradies, they all they wanted was to decide for themselves, not to be forced. And so they went to the unions, and basically the unions threw them under the bus. They said, "Nah, you should be fired if you think you should have a choice." And so you have the unions now advocating for firing tradies who haven't done anything wrong. They just want to have a medical choice. And so all these tradies, they went to the protests. They went outside the union offices, and the police came to shut them down, shut down the protest. You know, a lot of these police are just weak dogs. They look like teenagers, and they're dealing with a bunch of big tradesmen. So it didn't go too well for them. But so after that happened, the Premier decided to punish all construction workers in Victoria by banning construction for 2 weeks. It had nothing to do with safety. It was just a punishment because they had protested outside those unions. You know, it's like
it is a mafia. I mean, that is mafia. Please continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wasn't going to go as far as mafia, but I was going to say it's like a teacher saying I'm keeping in the whole class because one boy was naughty. But it is like a mafia. But so that was the first day of protest. So, and the next day, the police came more prepared. They really ramped it up, and they used a kind of brutality I don't think we've ever seen used on protesters before, especially not Antifa, not Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion. The police love those guys, and the unions, they love those guys too. But yeah, when it all comes down to it, the tradies just want to get back into their work site, do their job, but they're not allowed to do that now. The ones who are unvaxxed will be fired, and everybody who is vaxxed is suspended from work for 2 weeks. So these protests have had subsequent days, and the police ramped it up. They brought in the counter-terrorism squad to make an example of them. But they were still, these people are still weak cowards, and most of the time they would just wait around for these tradies to break off from the pack, and then 7 or 8 police would just jump on, you know, a single guy and arrest him. But yeah, that's some of the pushback we've had, and apparently some of the nurses are joining with these tradies in the protests as well, because they've been mandated. So I have a lot of sympathy for tradesmen. I have a lot of respect for a lot of them. And so I think it was very tough for Australians to watch that happening to these men who just want to work.
Has this, I mean, I know it's a tough question to answer, because it's not like you go out and talk to a cross section of thousands of people, and especially those who might be very, very different in their views than we are. But do you have any indication of that? I mean, that's crossing a Rubicon. I mean, this is going to be remembered as a dark time in Australian history, that particular incident. There's other incidents in our other countries here as well, in the States and Europe. Has this woken anyone up? Has this jarred anyone, this news? Has it flipped people from one side to the other?
Well, it is always hard for me to say things like that, because in my circles and with the tradesmen who I speak to, they do seem very sympathetic to the other guys who are protesting. And the numbers were dwindling every day, because the police were arresting, 100 of them. They were giving them fines of $6,000 when these guys have no work already. So that can be quite hard. But I don't know, because a similar thing has happened in America, where, Trump supporters have protested. They've been attacked by Antifa, and that the police have done nothing except to protect their attackers and to fuel the fire. I think it did wake up a lot of Americans to the situation, but it was a wake-up call that was needed, because I think a lot of these tradesmen would have looked at Black Lives Matter, and they would have looked at these other protesters that are so-called left-wing and said, and they might have thought that police would be the same with them, that police would have a hands-off approach. They didn't realize something. I could have told them myself, but they had to learn it for themselves, that no, they're not protected, because they are actually anti-system, while these other groups are pro-system, or at least they're used as tools to disrupt and lead towards a greater cause. So I can't say for certain how everybody feels about this, what the percentages are, but I would say that a significant amount of people have really had their eyes opened by what's been happening.
I don't know how serious this news was, but a few weeks ago on social media, we saw that the truck drivers in Australia were all getting together and saying that they were going to stop making deliveries in an attempt to bring attention to what's going on as a form of protest, as a form of civil disobedience. Was that possibly going to happen at some point? And if it was, do you know how it was broken up?
Yeah, I did hear about that, and there was practically a media blackout on that. I think on the day of the protest, it wasn't even in the news as far as I found it. I just want to add a little important thing that was not mentioned by many people. With those protests, the Premier rang Facebook and said to cut all live streams of the protest. And not only that, they cut the internet to the entire city area. Now, that's what I've been told, and a lot of people have claimed it. I don't think the news even reported on that, but everybody's internet just went out in the whole area, and they made it a no-fly zone as well for non-government helicopters. So the news couldn't even, fly over to film it. But that's the kind of crackdown they do when they're serious about stopping something. Now, with these truckies, yeah, they stopped. And was it significant? Well, the thing is, truck drivers strike all the time. And I think these companies are kind of prepared to absorb those strikes and work around them. So I don't want to belittle their efforts, but I don't think it's going to help.
What about anything more on anti-whitism, how that relates? I know you were getting into that subject a little while ago.
Yeah. Well, this is the most important thing to us, isn't it? When we talk about these different subjects, we talk about how they relate to anti-whitism. I think this virus has been used as a huge distraction from the important things. And you have this whole political debate focused around this bloody virus because when you're dealing with all these extreme lockdown measures, losing your income, losing your freedom, you don't really have time to think about the big picture, about where our nation's headed and all that kind of stuff. So you're just trying to get through the day, really. And so this is another example of how accelerationism doesn't help us, because I know. Do you know the guys in the white positive spheres? They were mocking people losing their jobs. They were saying that all they care about is the stock market. They were saying my stonks or something like that, because they thought this whole thing was brilliant and they thought it would bring about a positive change for our people. But no, that didn't happen. No, instead what we have these conservatives complaining about wearing masks in shops and these theories about depopulation and all that crap. And I know we're talking about it right now, but I hope we can use these conversations to promote white well-being. So when you talk to vagues, don't get caught up in about all this COVID stuff unless you can relate it to anti-whitism, unless you can tie it in with white well-being. And the other thing we should consider, a lot of people, well, I'd say most people now are vaccinated, right? So they've had their shots. So regardless of what you think of the vaccines, we don't want to exclude the majority of the population from white well-being. In Australia, I think we're heading for about 70%. So if you're going around saying, oh, you got the vax, you're an idiot, do you know how bad it is? You're just going to turn off most people, the majority of our people. That's not a good idea. And that's why I've avoided talking about the risks and benefits and so on, because at the end of the day, I want to be focused on opposing anti-whites, which is a topic I know a fair bit about. I don't know a lot about medicine. I know practically nothing about it. I try to learn a little bit, but yeah, there's so many different conversations about COVID. I suggest we just take the white positive angle on it because nobody else will.
Do either of you have any ideas on how to develop that? I mean, there are people who don't think about these things, but if they're now questioning media narratives, then there's an opening there.
Sorry, I just need a bit of drink. How does COVID relate to white well-being? It sounds like a kind of a tough question, but if you just read the articles, you'll probably find that race is injected into everything. The left already does that for us, and so we can just respond to that. Now, there was a story. Do you know Nicki Minaj? She's this.
Yeah.
She her thing is like
not personally.
Her thing is like jiggling her ass, and like the camera does real big close-ups, and she jiggles it, and then her backup dancers bend over and they jiggle their butts, and she sings about how her butt is more jiggly than any other girls, and all the boys like it.
Brilliant.
Not to disrespect, I know you're a big fan of her, Jared, and your music's heavily influenced.
One of my biggest influences, yeah.
Yeah, but I won't attack her music. But no, she said she wasn't against taking the vax, but she wouldn't take it.
But
yeah, that was the big problem. She said she would take it if she wanted it, but she wouldn't be forced. She thought that shouldn't be a motivation for me taking it. And so the media went off at her, and she had a big dispute with this other lady who was also black. And so the other lady said, "You're siding with the white men. This is what the white men want." And Nicki Minaj was saying, "No, you're trying to silence a black woman. I'm a black woman with my black voice." And what happens? The conservatives, like these Breitbart people, come in and say, "Look, The Guardian wrote a hit piece on her, and The Guardian people are all white." Now, what does that tell you? It tells you the conservatives think being white is bad, that because the Guardian writers were white, we should dismiss their view when a black woman is speaking. Now, I know they're trying to be clever, as hard as that is for me to say, because it's the dumbest thing in the world. They're trying to trick the left into saying, "Oh, we can't question her because she's black. These are our rules and we must abide by them." But do they even realize that they're being ironic anymore? I don't know. I don't think so. Because I've said before as well, what is Antifa? Antifa is a bunch of white kids going around beating up minorities. Are they being clever, or do they actually believe that? It's incredibly stupid. But your question, Jared, was about how do we relate this to anti-whitism. It's right there. A conversation about COVID quickly turned to race and quickly became about black voices. And then conservatives chimed in, and quickly it became about how white people should not be criticizing a black woman. So there are opportunities. When you see them, you've got to take them. I can't think of a lot of examples, but there's one. And another one I would tell you is just to point out little observations about, these people who get their doors kicked in and arrested by police. It seems like they're always white, doesn't it? It seems like when I see these videos, it's always a white guy or a white woman it happens to. Am I to believe that the only ones breaking the rules are white people? Well, definitely not. I know that for a fact. I know, I won't mention other groups, but I know a particular group in Australia that breaks all the rules, and it seems like they get away with it. So things like that. This is how we can talk about the issues of COVID, but bring it back to what's most important to us. That's what I try to do, at least.
That's exactly, brother. You brilliantly speaking to everything that's happening right now in the once great country of Australia, and magnificently attesting to what works, and clearly seeing with so many others. How many times do these other folks out there in the white sympathetic sphere, whether they are ant-nats or not, how many times do they have to get it wrong, folks, before people stop listening to them? It's really an IQ test. And you just have these people keep showing up and giving money to them and going to their rallies and going to their events. How many times do they have to get it wrong? Because here's the issue. The main reason we are where we are today, foundationally, fundamentally, across the West, why we have come to a place where in a once glorious and epic country of Australia, and happening elsewhere as well, the reason we could come to a place like this, where people could be locked down the way prisoners are locked down, literally, is because they have been brainwashed into white guilt, self-hating themselves with anti-whiteism. They think they deserve punishment. They think they deserved to be flogged. They hate themselves. They hate our people. They hate Western civilization. And you say, well, Jason, how are you sure about this? I can just simply tell you this. Imagine, if you will, that suddenly in a parallel universe, Australia is not a white civilization, but I don't know, it's an Asian civilization, or it's a black civilization, or it's an Arab civilization. How many of those millions of white people would be fine with that civilization being destroyed by way of lockdowns and all of these restrictive policies and practices, seeing it all laid to waste with this? The lives of all of those poor non-white people all around them, all destroyed, non-white children suffering as the primary sufferers, not as the collateral damage, as is the case now, but the primary sufferers, the primary targets. All of these white people today would put their foot down and would not have anything of it. Not only that, it's not only an inverse equation here, but you have the simple fact that the fight and the drive and the enthusiasm for freedom and liberties that is so natural for our people, that has posed such a problem for tyrants throughout the ages, that is beaten and bred out of us with anti-whiteism. We do not long for freedom and to pull down the tyrants the way we used to because of anti-white ideology. Because when you learn that you are wretched, that everything that comes from the center of your being is wrong and backward and evil, then that means even that hatred for, even that purest of hate that you feel, an odium for the tyrant, even that then is wrong. Even that then is backward. And that is why our people reject all of what is instinctual and natural for us in these moments, as tyrants tie up the final strings around our countries. This absolutely could not have happened across Western civilization without anti-whiteism being infected into every single white person in Western civilization. It could not have even come an inch to this. Now, listen, if you have questions or comments, folks, your financial gifts, get them in now, because we have about 15 minutes left to be here with the great, lovely Porridge and his very clear seeing, highly intelligent mind. JK160, I just saw this in the live chat, says, please ask Porridge if there is a political party that opposes the lockdowns and if they have a shot at taking power. Porridge.
As far as I know, there is a party, Clive Palmer's party, who is against the lockdowns. Whether or not his other policies are good on anything, I'm not so sure. And I don't think he has any chance of winning, really. But we are currently under a conservative government, but this COVID situation is being controlled by the states. And so in my particular state of Melbourne, very left-wing, the Green Party does very well here. It didn't do so well last time, but in New South Wales, the other main COVID hotspot is under a conservative leadership, a conservative premier as well. But political solutions, I don't see them. I don't know. I don't know where this is headed. And the frustration is that there's so little you can do about it. You can say, oh, well, let's rise up, but what are you going to do? I mean, all the businesses are closed. So I guess you could travel somewhere and they'll block up the road. There's not much advice I can give on this other than to hope that that maybe when there are a greater percentage of people vaccinated, that they will start freeing people up, and hopefully they won't put tracking systems on all of us and people will just go back. Because the thing is with a lot of these rules as well, 2 hours exercise a day, nobody is going to check how long you've been outside. So a lot of it is just hoping people will follow the rules. And there is only so far they can do with that. There are things that police will leave alone, and not wearing a mask outside, you have to wear a mask outside. They'll often leave you alone for that. So, I won't talk about I won't endorse any political party. I just do my thing. I talk about anti-whitism, and I'll leave the rest to the world.
Well, there you go. And that's exactly the most effective strategy, folks, to employ. Any subject matter. So what was I just saying a moment ago? It was because we have been brought to this place because of what we have been infected with. Concepts, ideas, language in the context of a story. And as a consequence, all arguments and the derivative deductions, etc., counter arguments take place within that narrative, that context, with the concepts, the verbiage, the dialectics that we have been infected with. And in every single case, we lose for the well-being of our people. So the only thing that we can do, and the most powerful thing that we can do, it's a wonderful reality to realize this. The only thing we can do happens to also be the most powerful thing we can do, is to discuss all of the things that are going on around us, everything that is baneful to our people and the civilization that we have built, Western civilization. Talk with them about these things, and then share with them the concepts that empower our people, so that all of this then has to take place in that setting, in that context. So anti-white, anti-whiteism, anti-white narrative, Western kind, white erasure. There are many more that are part of the lexicon, concepts that you can use in conversation to empower our people. And that's where we are. The most powerful thing is the only thing we can do. Talk about these things, as Porridge said, with your friends, family, and strangers while there's time to do so, and get these concepts out there into people's mouths and minds. Because just as easily as the anti-whites, or maybe I shouldn't say easily, this is effectively as the anti-whites have tied us up into knots so that we cannot even defend our right to be alive or to preserve anything that we have done and made. Just as thoroughly as they have done that to us, we can do the same to them. And we've got to start doing it now, unless you want your whole world to end up like we're seeing the most, the strictest environments in Australia, and elsewhere across Western civilization. Some white guy we know as Biospirit of the West, financially gifted $30. Let's get a big round of raucous emojis for Biospirit of the West, folks. Thank you so very much. He says, is Australia still bringing in invaders during the lockdowns to continue white erasure like in Europe and North America? And we do know that there was, at least as Porridge was talking, brother, that he said that Australia got their numbers all the way down to 0, and then they opened the borders. They got the sickness, the numbers down to 0, and then they opened the borders again and began letting in these wonderful border crossers. So Porridge, is that still going on? Is the border still open?
I'm pretty sure it is. I don't think they'd make a big song and dance about it because they wouldn't want us to know, but I'm sure they are. And this thing with Afghanistan, I think we are bringing in 3,000 of them. And so to come here, it is quite difficult because you have to go into a quarantine camp or a hotel and stay there, I think, for maybe 18 days. But they're going to make it happen. It is closed, I think, to international students, and probably green card applicants aren't what America calls a green card. We call a visa. I'm sure people are coming in. A lot of people are returning because what happens with a lot of these refugees, so-called refugees, is they'll come to Australia, they'll go on welfare, they'll get all their checks and that, and then they'll go overseas and live there with the checks getting sent over there. But as soon as they want to, they'll come back again. So they might spend 6 months there, 6 months here. They go back to the country which they said they were escaping from. So we had to let back in a lot of those types of people. A lot of we've just got so many people from India and China who wanted to get back in away from their countries. And so, yeah, they're all being let in, which is another indication that they're serious in certain areas, but not in others. And so it kind of reveals a lot about their intentions.
Well, you made the magnificent point, and very telling. Absolutely not surprised that you would make this point, that the anti-white narrative is proven fraudulent, because the anti-whites don't believe in it. Because if they did believe in it, they wouldn't want this. The governments that are in the anti-white narrative built for and running for the sole benefit of white people. They wouldn't want to give all of what was left of any rights and freedoms away to such a government. But those are the folks who are the loudest, the shrillest to get people to turn over what's left of liberties in our countries across the West. Please, immediately turn it all over to the government. They know for sure, the anti-whites, that the anti-white narrative is false. And you can see these videos, like everybody will remember the video where the college young man, they were on campus and it was nighttime, they were videotaping, and what he said, I love my people. I love my people. And he was a white young man, and they were filming him, these anti-whites. I think they were mostly non-white. There could have been some white anti-whites as well. And then one of the non-white anti-white girls started screaming, what was it? Do your stuff, Twitter. Kick him off. Do your stuff. They know exactly who's in charge. And that's why they would turn over. That's why they would want to turn over the rest of the liberties, because they know these governments are anti-white, and they'll burn down the rest of the resistance to the victimization of Western kind and Western civilization. The great Irish Ice, ladies and gentlemen, coming in. And if you have a question or comment, get it in now, because we are rapidly running out of time on this episode of TAP. Irish Ice, financially gifting $5. Thank you, brother. I've started my own community advocacy organization called White Wellbeing Canada, he writes. I'm opening an Antiwhitism victim support phone line and a public coffee stand where Canadians can receive love and have their concerns about white erasure addressed. Well, how about that? Now that is taking the bull by the horns, folks. Irish Ice, please keep us informed about how that's going, and if you're being harassed and the successes that you're having. God bless you. Thank you for your service to White Wellbeing. That is really magnificent. We need more.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, when non-whites are mildly inconvenienced by a white person, they got countless organizations straight on the phone to them. Now, that video you just mentioned before, how many times has something like that happened where there was no camera and nobody that white person can go to and say, this has happened to me. The organizations like ADL catalog every little thing, write reports. And so that also proves that white people are not discriminating at all, because we read through it and it's a joke. And most of these things they give us are hate hoax. What are they called?
Yeah,
hate hoaxes. Yes.
Yes.
That also proves that they have nothing. That idea of having a phone line, very good, because we do need to start cataloging these things. And I think if somebody did start doing that, we'd find out how severe the situation really is, because all we've got now at the moment is now and then Breitbart might publish a video of a white person being abused at a university like we saw recently. But that happens far more often than you know.
Wow. Well, brother, it has been magnificent having you with us today. And thank you so much for getting up and talking with us about the horrors that are being inflicted on our people in our once great country of Australia. I always wanted to visit Australia, and I guess I still have a shred of hope, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would be able, even if I was able to get the money together for it, to travel there, and that they would even let me in based on not even knowing who I am and what I do for White Wellbeing, just based on vaccinations and whatever else. It's just become it's crazy that, Australia has this unsavory story that folks sometimes hear, and it's same thing could be said about the United States. Prisoners were sent there. Well, prisoners were sent everywhere by European countries. That's one of the things they did. And but then other people, a lot of wonderful people, magnificent, brilliant, hardworking people, and that's how these places look just like the rest of the Western world, because they are made of the biosphere of the West. But oddly enough, the anti-whites are making it into a penal colony with these restrictions and using COVID-19, as dangerous as it is, and as many people as it has actually harmed, using that as the excuse to turn it into this. Your remedy, of course, can't be overall worse than the disease, and that's ultimately, I think, the direction they're going, in my humble opinion. Brother, your final thoughts and where folks can find you. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, just to speak to what you said before, that another thing they've done to us is to use our good qualities against us. And so we do have a stiff upper lip, and that's a great thing. That would have got us through terrible droughts and plagues and that. But now they're using that to make us tolerate things that aren't for our benefit, making us go through things that we shouldn't be putting up with. Another thing they've done to us is exploit our trust. There would have been a time when we trusted our governments and we knew they were on our side. And a lot of people still feel like that. So that's another way of using there's nothing worse than using somebody's good qualities against them to harm them. There's nothing sicker than that. Yep. But well, to just my advice for anyone right now struggling, I know there isn't much we can do. So just try to see it as a test. We're in crazy times and we're going through a bottleneck, and I want to see all of you guys come out the other side. So you just got to take strength from somewhere. You can take it from our ancestors because their spirit is running through you. You can take it from these two great men, Jared and Jason. I think you set a great example through these lockdowns, and you've remained stoic. And I know one thing I know for sure is that we're not going to ever gain a victory without a huge struggle. There's never going to be a smooth transition into white well-being. It was always going to be something like what you're seeing right now. It's hard, I know that, but it's getting interesting, and we're living through one of the most important shifts in our history. So stay strong, just keep fighting, because these hard times were always going to happen. So I'm glad I'm here with you two anyway, and I had a great chat today, and I thank you for having me on, and I hope to be on again soon.
Thank you so much, brother. Really appreciate you. Mr. George.
Always good to speak to you, Porridge. Last time we spoke to Porridge, Jason and I were in the same room back in May. We had
Yes.
met up, and it was a special tap where we broadcast in person from the same place. And we wanted to have a friend, someone that knew us well, on. So Porridge was there with us. But even so, that was certainly not his first time. He's a veteran of this show. So if you want to find out, listen to other Porridge episodes. We did a special on what they're teaching in schools last summer, in the summer of 2020. You go to the afterparty.tv. It's the shared media site that Jason and I have, and you can type in Porridge's name. You can type in other people's names, see if they've been on the show. Sometimes some people in the chat are surprised at who's been on. They don't know there's a 3.5-year history here, and they'll say, hey, you should have this guy on. And I'll have to politely tell them, yeah, he's been on twice so far. Go to the afterparty.tv, bookmark it. We have much more control over that than social media profiles, of course. Type in people's names, type in subjects. The episodes are pretty well tagged. You'll find Going Free, you'll find the After Party, and you'll find some related media as well, the catalog of everything. My site is thegreatorder.com. It is the catalog of all I do, working on a lot of music. I have a few songs out and more on the way. Appreciate your support and sharing that around as well. But we will all talk soon. Thank you. I send you all my love and my best. Jason, please take us out.
Well, thank you so much, brother. Dearly appreciate you as well. And all of you who are watching now, watching in replay as well, the Wallflowers, those who speak up, thank you very much. And we deeply appreciate everyone who financially gifted. A big debt of gratitude to the great Fornull, who was here as the wizard he is. He's just showing up here and there and doing some moderating here while doing some wizardry elsewhere at the same time, I'm sure. A great champion in service to white well-being. And folks, Porridge was saying it all right there, that we have to stick together. We have each other, and we have our victories that we're having here. And please, as things get worse out there, and as we see more and more challenges in our countries around the world, do not suffer bibs. Do not suffer the Biden bipolar syndrome. Don't suddenly go running off into some hysterical, ridiculous, accusatory, slanderous, villainy role-playing nonsense. Instead, have recourse to the one thing that has worked in the totality of our lives, our parents' lives, our grandparents' lives, and that's going free. We have the central concept that takes down anti-whiteism. Anti-white is out there in the world. We need to continue to stoke those wildflowers so that they bloom everywhere, and there isn't a place that an anti-white can go to escape the reality that we have forced them to have to face. We need to do this. It's up to us. If we don't do it, no one else will. This is the tool that works. When you feel the most frightened, when you feel the most angry, turn to White Wellbeing and get active. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time.